can you believe the story of that? That's unbelievable. It absolutely is unbelievable. Anyway, all right. So let's talk a little bit now about one of the main attractions when you come down here. That was the animals, and now we talk about the Knysna wildlife. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful areas when you come down here to see the forests and the indigenous trees. Some of them up to 600 years old at least. Everyone was concerned about how the fires actually impacted on the forests and vegetation. But believe it or not, initial findings indicate the iconic Knysna forest was not affected by the fire. I mean, that's beautiful. The forest is a haven for about 465 species in the forest areas, over 22 species of amphibians, there's 24 reptile species, 305 species of birds, and some 42% of South Africa's 290 mammal species. So I've got Paddy Gordon with me. He's the manager of the Garden Route National Park, and he's going to talk to us about all this and more. Good to have you here on Morning Live. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite incredible. You're telling me that the wildlife managed to survive these fires.
Well, the indigenous forests, the temperate forests, are quite resistant to fire. We did lose some of the fynbos in the area, but those are little smaller patches of areas, and we're quite happy with that burn. But the wildlife all take refuge in the forest, and very little of the forest burned. We have about 60,000 hectares of forest from George all the way to Tsitsikamma, and most of that wildlife, most of that habitats are quite much undamaged by this fire. Yeah. Probably less than 1% of all that forest was damaged by the fire.
That is, it's almost mind-blowing. Why? I mean, what do you think is behind that?
Well, there are a number of factors. Your forests are a lot more moist than the surrounding area. Okay. Some of your alien plants are much quicker to burn with their resins and content. Plantations, unfortunately, also burn a lot faster. When the fire approaches the edge of the forest, it usually bypasses the forest quite easily.
Yeah. Phenomenal. That's an absolutely phenomenal story. The Knysna forests, why are they so important from an ecological point of view?
Well, this is the only continuous section of forest in South Africa of this nature. 60,000 hectares contiguous. There are smaller patches of forest in other parts of South Africa. This is the only part where you have this large section of forest. And because it is continuous, the animals can move through it. There are no fences and highways and things in between. It can absorb a lot of the impacts of the activities and the development on the coastal area. So the forest is actually quite healthy, quite intact, and we're quite happy to be able to protect it.
I mean, I gave a little bit of numbers and statistics about the species, but I believe there are about 465 different species in the forests. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, the trees themselves are not that many, a few 100 and something trees, but in the trees obviously there's refuge for plants, other plants, insects, reptiles and things like that are able to use it as a habitat. And because the forest is quite in a healthy state, we're quite happy that the animals are quite safe inside there. Okay. And they were able to escape from the fires into the forest areas and be quite safe.
Yeah. So the actual wildlife, I mean, the effect on them, I mean, can you see what the devastation was? I mean, were many of the lives lost of the animals and the wildlife?
No, very little, actually very little. Right. In the areas where there was fynbos, we might have had a snake and a tortoise and things like that lost. But because the national park is unfenced, it's completely open access area, the animals would have been able to flee from the fire, the noise of the fire, from one part of the forest into the next part of the forest. Yeah. So the loss of wildlife is actually very little.
That's great to hear. Just finally, one of the big concerns, as soon as I arrived here, a lot of people talking to me about the fact that the threats of landslides, I mean, now you've got these I suppose open spaces, the trees have all been burnt down. I mean, you can actually see how the trees just stop and where the fire started, and I mean that people are very worried about mudslides if there are heavy rains. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, that is probably the biggest environmental threat. The environmental threat was not the fire itself, but after the fire, with all the steep slopes next to the estuary being denuded now vegetation, that is the biggest threat now of mudslides, extra mud and soil being in the estuary, huge wildlife, huge biodiversity in the estuaries then would be threatened as well. So we have a multi-agency task team that's already working together, ourselves and the Knysna municipality, even some of the fire agencies, which will look at trying to prioritize where are those threatened areas, which we need to address first. We'll pool our resources and we look at that. The other thing, of course, is a lot of the areas that have burnt were under alien invasive vegetation, and that's going to resprout 10 times more than it was before, which will repeat the fire risk that we had before.
Yeah.
So those are probably the two most important things that we'll address. Other things will be if there's infrastructure, that pipes and things that might have been damaged and burst, it will allow things to run into the estuary that don't belong there. But we have a task team. We're going to pool our resources and our competencies to take care of that.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for talking to us. Good luck going forward. I know that it's a tough time, but I mean, it just seems like people are pulling together and making sure that Knysna rises. I mean, that's what this is all about, isn't it? It's just getting people here, enjoying it. I mean, it's the most beautiful place to come and visit. It really is.
Yeah,
indeed.
It is a beautiful place, and we'd like to say that the natural estate is as beautiful as it was before, which attracts people to Knysna. And we feel for the residents of Knysna. They're really going through trauma still, but it is still one of our most beautiful places in South Africa. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us join you here on this program. Paddy Gordon is the manager of the Garden Route National Park, talking to us about the wildlife, and quite miraculously, only 1% of it was affected due to this. And when you do come and visit Knysna, this is what you want to come and see. I mean, you just want to see these magnificent forests. I mean, the drive down here is absolutely incredible, and you'll still see all of that. All right, quick break here on the program. After this, we'll have your news at 8. Do stay tuned.